Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, fans, listeners, subscribers. Hopefully you're subscribing on all available platforms. Welcome to another episode of Den of Sin with Devin and James. I am James, and joining with me as always, the incomparable, the irreplaceable Devin. Devin, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. Happy New Year, James.
Happy New Year. Oh, God, yeah. Weirdly, I'd forgotten that we were in a new year Happy New Year.
It all blends. I'm telling you, I feel like we're in some sort of a time loop anyways.
I do too.
It will fit into this topic very well. I actually had a moment last night where, for our listeners, we really hoped to make this a New Year's episode, but things kept coming up on both of our ends that were making it impossible for us to record. And last night at about 2 a.m, I was reading something and it suddenly popped in my head. Oh shit, we were supposed to do the podcast tonight. Like, I totally thought I had stood you up. And then I went and rechecked my texts and we had agreed on doing it today. And I'm like, I completely forgot we did that. Oh, I'm saved. But I do think we're on some sort of a bizarre time loop, and we're sitting here on January 5th now and taking in election news if you're watching TV. So
yes.
Yeah. So it never stops. And that is part of why we wanted to do this week's topic, which is time travel. The genre of time travel. I don't know. Would you call it time travel, or would you say this is about time travelers, or?
I don't, it's weird because I until we discuss it, it's not even like its own subgenre I think of. I think it's like I guess subgenre of science fiction films, but it's not like one where it's funny because until you proposed this topic, I didn't realize how many films really do feature time travel as like the main driving sort of theme of the film, or one of the big, plot points of the film, realizing how many are out there. I will say though, time travel films I've always taken with a grain of salt just because it is such a quagmire. The inevitable rabbit hole of like, well, that's not how time travel works. I mean, literally there are time travel movies that have that own internal argument. And I had also, as we talked about, offline, before we recorded, is there was a lot I hadn't seen that I forgot were like sort of huge movies. So I did have the opportunity to sort of recently watch a few, and actually a few of them really, there are films I'd heard good things about, but had just not gotten around to, but have now become a big fan of. But yeah, I'm excited. What made you think about, besides the New Year's, the correlation between starting a new year and everything that's been going on, where, like you said, we do feel like every day is the same as the day before.
Yeah, and get me the hell out of 2020.
That's right.
I did have a reason why I love time travel movies, though, and why I even thought of it as a topic to begin with. It's something I wish I could do, I think, is the easiest way to put it. You and I, we travel in some pretty nerdy circles, or we've been known to anyways. I don't think that either one of us can claim that we've never had a long conversation about what kind of superpower we would possess if we could possess a superpower. Mine has always traditionally been time travel. I really don't care if I can fly or if I can break shit with my bare hands or repel bullets or anything, but I would love to go back in time. The thing is, I don't want to go back in time and do superhero stuff. I don't want to go back and solve crimes or right wrongs. I kind of just want to go and like check into a Best Western and watch the ABC Sunday night movie or something. I mean, it'd be cool to like go and see Disneyland on opening day or something like that. But most of those things I would consider to be too much of a pain in the ass to probably be there. So I'm exactly the demographic that someone would go to for time travel tourism, I think.
Well, see, that's, Devin, that's, again, one of the reasons that I feel like I love recording this podcast is that a lot of times, while we both have come from our own places, we do have a lot in common. And weirdly, the amount of time I spent, first off, the very first podcast idea I ever had, this is going back years now, was called Stupid Uses for a Time Machine. And I literally spend hours thinking about going back in time just to either, go buy Halloween decorations in 1983, or as the super nerd collector in me, to go back in time and buy all the cool shit, all the Planet of the Apes Amigo dolls and like.
Right. And not to like sell it and get future rich. It's just so that, because like, God damn it, I want an original Dr.
So I'm not future poor trying to buy modern pricing. Yeah, that's the thing is, and, as a big fan of, I think you and I lived through the golden age of pop culture
I
having
100% think that, yes.
Yeah. And so just the sanctity that I hold my childhood to, and just again, like you said, like Saturday morning cartoons, the
Right.
pure bliss of Saturday morning cartoons in the 80s. My wife and I literally on Christmas Day, no, it was Christmas Eve morning, we laid in bed for hours and on YouTube just watched cartoon commercials from the 80s.
Yes.
Toy commercials, junk food commercials.
Dude, that is my
Hours.
nighttime ritual. That is like what puts me to sleep. That's my my blanket.
Same.
I will.
It's like
the very thing that we would have hated back then, which is the commercials, are the most comforting thing, because it's those logos, it's those jingles, it's the fashions and the hairstyles, which are much more authentic to what our neighbors were wearing than anything you'll find in a movie from that era.
Damn, I literally had that exact conversation about, I think, having watched Wonder Woman 84 and how a lot of that shit was super disingenuous and stuff. And the whole like, yeah, look at we're 80s wearing 80s clothes, so stupid. Like,
you
dude,
said that was Wonder Woman 84. I missed the title.
Yes, Wonder Woman 84.
Okay. I still haven't seen it. I probably won't.
Probably, yeah, you'll survive. But yeah, like how the genuine, like those commercials. And again, it's like you said, it's like it's slipping into a warm bath. It's like putting a, like wrapping yourself a little bit in a blanket. It's so comforting because it takes you back to your childhood. And again, in the 80s, like it was the era for kids. Like it was when youth culture really started to expand and they were making movies for kids. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing is I think about it all the time. I've literally even considered going to a bank and trying to get a bunch of old money. In the off chance that someday time travel is possible, I can time travel back and use, era accurate dollar bills, like, pre 1990s, dollar bills. So,
I have had the same thought. Dude, if I ever go back in time, I am taking you with me, because you and I, we know how to do this. We've lived it in our heads.
We put a lot of thought into this. So yeah, so for that, I mean, that's a perfect, I mean, yeah, so that's the thing is like, well, I can't necessarily put myself in the shoes normally of like, a time travel to save the world kind of scenario, which is, good entertainment, which we'll talk about. The sort of time travel movies that are more like in the vein of like Back to the Future, where it's more of like a personal thing or those kind of things, like I can get behind, because again, even just going like in the case of like in the original Back to the Future, Marty McFly, I'd just love to go see, I would love to see what my parents looked like in high school. I'd love to see America in the 50s. So anyways, but yeah, sweet. Well, I'm glad that we share that. It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, let's, I'm going to try to get the course back to the films here, because this is another genre that we're covering, or subgenre. I think it would probably take us 10 years to cover a full genre of something. I think we're always going to be doing subgenres, but doing some research on time travel movies, I thought this was going to be really cut and dry, kind of like Werewolves, where there's a couple of questions here or there, but this turned out to be just as complicated, if not more complicated, than what is a revenge movie.
I agree.
I started to go back into like books and short stories and try to trace where time travel as a plot line ever really came from. The earliest one that is recorded was from 1733, and it's called Memoirs of the 20th Century. And I find it fascinating how much time travel from back then and still today usually seems to be about somehow time traveling to the 20th century. That seems to be the linchpin of time travel stories. Another thing I realized by looking up all of these books and short stories is there's actually several that exist prior to the first written story about an actual time machine. Like I said, that Memoirs of the 20th Century came out in 1733. In between then, you had things like Rip Van Winkle, and then even H.G. Wells wrote a time travel story prior to the time machine. But you didn't actually have an actual like time machine until The Clock That Went Backwards in 1881. So that's what really made me think about like, well, what does this subgenre entail? And it expanded my idea of time travel, because we think time travel movies, we immediately go to time machine, but that's not necessarily true of even some of the best time travel movies. Don't involve machines at all. It's dreams and spells and curses and the Rip Van Winkle syndrome, basically. And that's still used today. So I definitely wanted to talk to you a little bit about like what makes a time travel movie to you in that sense. Like, does a Rip Van Winkle type story count as a time travel story to you, or do you feel like there needs to be some sort of a sci-fi machine element to it?
Well, I mean, I think the whole point, why we are so interested in time travel movies is like the fish out of water kind of aspect of the stranger in a strange land kind of thing, where you take somebody either from the past and set them into a contemporary space, and then as a contemporary viewer, you can sort of see like how strange the world we live in now must have been, must be to this, somebody from a different bygone era, or a reverse where it's like somebody from contemporary society goes into the past and the future. So that's a big aspect of them is, the stranger in the strange land, somebody who, is seeing a society for the first time that blows their mind for one reason or another. So I think the main thing is it has to feature somebody born in a different time frame, experiencing, living in a different era.
All right. I think that's a pretty succinct definition.
Every now and then I nail one. Every now and then I get out a good.
Well, that being said, I'll still have a couple of variants to bring up later that belong in the is it a time travel movie category, because I think that's always a fun thing to bring up when we cover the subgenres.
And some of those are the ones I'm most excited to talk about. So
yes. So I guess if we're going to get started on just the movies, let's go ahead and tackle the big one first, the one that everyone expects us to talk about, and the one that you've already mentioned by name, which is the Back to the Future trilogy.
Obviously, the movie that sort of set, there'd been many time travel films that at least feature time travel as a plot element before, but Back to the Future is one of the most beloved movies of all time, starring one of the greatest, most likable actors. I mean, film stars, hard to call him a film star because his film career wasn't so successful. But
this was the hot spot of his film career for sure.
Some of his films like The Frighteners, and there's some films of his that I do love, but this was sort of like he did definitely peak. But anyways, I'm talking about Michael J. Fox, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the most popular films ever made. In fact, I do think it was a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3 years ago, it was voted the #1 most beloved movie trilogy or whatever of all time. Like it's one of those movies that everybody loves. And if you find somebody that doesn't like Back to the Future, they're probably a creep of some kind.
Yeah,
I will say one of the
contrarian at best.
Exactly. There's a few things about the movie, about the film that kind of irks me to this day. One is the amount of people that fucking talk shit on the name, that the name doesn't make any sense when the name makes perfect fucking sense.
Yeah, it makes exact sense.
And it's like this, shouldn't it be Back to the Past? No, what the fuck?
No, he's in the past. He's trying to get back.
Yes.
The movie is not about him struggling to get to 1955. He accidentally gets to 1955.
And he's stuck there and wants to go home. It boggles my mind. I love, though, it's become very, contemporary to sort of point out the bizarre aspects, the fact that, like, his mom comes on to him and stuff, and the fact that it's not... I love John Mulaney, and he has a whole thing about, Back to the Future, how weird it is. But all of his points in the joke is why I think it's so successful, is the fact that it's not about going back in time to kill Hitler, or it's like some kid gets fed in the past, is all the weird shit that happens to him. The whole thing with one of the most brilliant supporting actor characters of all time with Christopher Lloyd is Doc Brown. Like, what a weird character, what a weird performance, but it's just so perfect and stuff. But
I can't imagine anyone else playing that part. And there were other names were tossed around at one point. Dudley Moore was tossed around for Doc Brown, which would have been bizarre. Yeah, and the one that stuck out, Jeffrey Tambor was on the list too. The one that stuck out is like, maybe was John Lithgow, but but ultimately I think Christopher Lloyd was born to play this.
Yeah, and I love Lithgow, but Lithgow would have played the character. Well, I don't know. I can't say that. You can't presuppose a performance that didn't happen, but I think Christopher Lloyd brought enough eccentricity to the role while also being very sweet and kind and like a great sort of mentor figure, a paternal figure. Now, I was going to say, have you ever seen the Eric Stoltz footage?
I've seen some of it. I mean, anyone that's watched the movie has seen some of it, because that's Eric Stoltz fist hitting Biff Tannen at one point. But I've seen a little bit of it.
I love Eric Stoltz. There was a time in the 90s where I would have considered him probably one of my favorite actors, just because he had such a fucking, at one point he was such a really hot actor and was doing a lot of cool stuff.
He's got very natural style. I like him a lot.
Yeah. And he's very unique. Even though he's like a very kind of an everyman, that's the thing, is like, he's not particularly, he's a kind of goofy looking redhead guy. But yeah, it's the perfect example of how one person can really change a movie. And Michael J. Fox is that movie. The fact that,
he amicably left. Eric Stoltz, when they told him, we don't think you're right for this, he says, yeah, I don't think I'm right for it. And apparently he caused some problems on the set too, because he was very method. I don't know if he's still method at the time now, but he's very method at the time. And when you hear that someone's method, oftentimes you can translate that to being difficult on the set. And he insisted on being called Marty by everybody. So when he left, when Eric Stoltz was gone and people had to read the announcement that Eric had left the production, they had no idea who was being talked about. They're like, I thought his name was Marty.
Yeah.
So,
I love it.
But yeah, what a different world that would have been with and there were other casting decisions that were made around that too. There was a different woman playing Jennifer to go along with Eric Stoltz too. And it's not the Jennifer. I feel bad because she's now the forgotten actress, the first Jennifer in Back to the Future. And then in the sequels, she's played by Elizabeth Shue, who is every 80s nostalgia fan's dream queen. But she was originally cast by I can't remember her name. She ended up playing Jan in The Office, Michael's boss.
Oh wow! Okay, I didn't know that. Okay,
she was the Jennifer to go along with Eric Stoltz. They didn't even get to film anything with her yet, and she was let go because she was too tall for Michael J. Fox. So that's a really disappointing what if for her career. I'm sure.
Absolutely.
I'm sure she would have been fine in it.
Yeah, but again, I don't think that was that role. I mean, fucking Elizabeth Shue in the sequels barely had any screen time. It's funny. I was just talking about Elizabeth Shue because, obviously, she's very, like you said, one of the faces of the 80s, even though, again, her film career wasn't huge, wasn't in the same realm of, say, Molly Ringwald, but, the role she had really important.
Yeah, really Ringwald was never nominated for an Oscar, though.
That's right. And she was fantastic. In fact, anybody who talks shit on either Elizabeth Shue as an actress or even more importantly, as far as that film goes, anybody who talks shit on Nicolas Cage as being a shitty actor can eat my nuts. By the way, Devin, I don't know if you have Netflix, but the new show History of Bad Words is just premiered on Netflix.
I gotta see it. I know all about it.
It's fucking well,
tell them who the host is. I know. Tell the audience.
It's Nick Cage, and he's being the uber Nick Cage in it. And it's just literally, it's a documentary show about the history of profanity, the history of swear words. And they have a lot of comedians and then real actual scientists and scholars kind of going through the etymology, the history of the origins and histories of swear words. But when Nick Cage is involved, when he's narrating or if they show him, he is Nicolas Cage turned up to 11, which is saying a lot for Nicolas Cage. There's a few moments where it just, anyways, but he's having fun and it's amazing. But to get back on track, because we do have a lot of films to talk about. Obviously, I liked. Were you a fan growing up of the Back to the Future trilogy? Oh
yeah, that is probably the thing that made me a time travel fan. I had been exposed to it through some TV shows, and we'll get to some of that later too. But yeah, Back to the Future was the first thing. It was the first time I think that I ever jumped up and down at the ending of something, because I actually didn't get to see Back to the Future theatrically. I was, I think, 6 when it came out. And for whatever reason, I think my dad went and saw it, but I was out of town. I spent the summer at my grandma's, and so I missed it. And so he showed it to me on VHS. And those who experienced it for the first time on VHS know that the movie ends with a "to be continued" tag. And I was so excited that this is the first thing where I knew for a fact that there was going to be a sequel. And apparently Michael J. Fox found out there was going to be a sequel by watching the VHS too. He had no clue that they planned to sequelize it. And that ending that left it so open wide for sequelization was just meant to be a funny ending. And in fact, Zemeckis has said that if he had it all to do it over again, if he had known that he was doing sequels, he never would have had Jennifer get in the DeLorean at the end, because that was how they had to explain that she's in the future and that she gets knocked out and has to basically sit on a front porch for the rest of the series of the.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it would have been a little different. Jennifer would not have been along for the ride. As an artist, I have to say they probably could have found more for Jennifer to do than
same. Yeah.
But so that's probably its biggest flaw, that as a series is Jennifer does not get used appropriately.
I also think universally the part 2 is the least beloved of the 3, at least as far as the people I've never discussed it with. I think at one time it was actually considered a bad movie. And I think time has
people
been
have come
kinder to
around.
it.
We're
But, I mean, part
nostalgic
3 is
for
so
that
much fucking
future
hard.
now. But
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the other thing, which we'll revisit many times in this, is the sort of face palm of retrofuturism, of like futures, supposed futures of, as of right now, we are currently in the Road Warrior timeline, 2021. So we should all be wearing spiked leather with mohawks, which I'm okay with.
I've got my assless pants, Jim. I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm ready.
I'm ready to go. But yeah, I will say that, obviously it is, Back to the Future is sort of it would be, if you say time travel movie to anybody, if this is fucking Family Feud and you gotta say like the, number one time travel movie, I think most people are gonna go back.
Yeah, and it's earned that. It's earned that, honestly.
Absolutely.
It's taught, I don't know if it still is, but as of a couple years ago at least, it was still taught as the perfect textbook screenplay at USC Film School, which is pretty incredible and makes a lot of sense for the first one, not for the sequels. I love that they went back to the Old West, because there's not a whole lot that goes back to the Old West in terms of time traveling. There's one in particular, again, I keep on dropping teases on this one. There is an Old West time travel story that I'll come back to, but I love part 3. I love the way that they loop it all together. I will go on record as saying I think Crispin Glover got screwed by part 2, and there are actually laws in place now to prevent that from happening.
Absolutely. Yep.
All that being said, Crispin Glover is not known to be the most reasonable human being, and he made it very difficult for the producers. For people that don't know the scandal, and Crispin Glover was asked to return as George McFly for Back to the Future 2, and he would have had roles in Back to the Future 3 as well. Instead, they ended up having Michael J. Fox play all of his own relatives, but he didn't want to come back because he was being offered less than some of the other actors, and he had been correctly told that he actually does give the best performance of the first movie. He may not be the heart and soul of, I think the heart and soul is still Marty and Doc, but the best performance, hands down, is Crispin Glover. And
without a doubt.
Yeah. And so when it came time to do the sequel and they wanted Crispin Glover, they should have probably have just given him whatever he asked for. But when he asked for a high amount and wouldn't back down, instead they ended up using footage that was shot for part 1 to make 1955 link together, and casting a completely different actor, but putting him in weird prosthetics and weird positions. Like for the entirety of the future sequence, he's hanging upside down because he has a back problem. And it's an actor in makeup doing a Crispin Glover impression.
Yep.
And I do think that that's kind of it's not an ethical gray area. I think it's actually a full-on dark spot that you can just recast the part. That's been done famously in all sorts of other TV shows and movie series where you recast
they even
the part.
did it in their own trilogy.
Yeah, exactly. In part 2.
Yeah.
It's very unfortunate that they went that path, because by trying to trick the audience into thinking that they were seeing Crispin Glover, they were doing him a pretty serious creative wrong, a professional wrong. 100%. So there are now laws saying that you can't do that. You can have somebody play the same character, a la Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal, for example, with Jodie Foster and Julianne Moore, but they would not have been able to make Hannibal by putting a digital image of Jodie Foster into the role, because she turned down the role itself. So I thought that was worthy of bringing up, because you don't really think of the Back to the Future movies as having much controversy to them outside of the tee-hee-hee argument of incest.
Yes.
But from Back to the Future, I think the next logical leaping spot is just to move over 1 year to 1986 and kind of go with what is stylistically almost a I don't say this derogatorily, but almost a quote unquote female Back to the Future in Peggy Sue Got Married, which features Nicolas Cage, of course, and Kathleen Turner in surprisingly her only ever Oscar nominated role. Did you see Peggy Sue Got Married?
I saw Peggy Sue Got Married multiple times. It was a film my mom loved. I haven't seen it. I haven't revisited it. In fact, it was on my list, but there's just so many I was trying to catch up on. And it was since it was one I've seen. Yeah, my mom was a big fan of that movie. It was a film I grew up, I'd watched it a few times, but I haven't revisited it in forever. But, again, the time travel, the one thing I do remember about that movie is that the time travel aspect is a little bit more ambiguous,
Yeah.
Like it just
there's the possibility that it could have all have been in her head and that it was a dream.
That's right. Yeah.
But it's the same sort of idea of, somebody going back to the 1950s. Yeah. But in this case, it's the actual person going back as themselves into a former time. Marty McFly didn't exist in the 50s. That's the whole point of the story, is he's trying to make sure that he does exist in the 80s. This is more of a love story where she goes back and kind of has the opportunity to explore some what ifs with some of the other boys in class, rather than going with Nicolas Cage, who she does marry outside right after high school and has a life with, and is desperately unhappy in her 1986 life. And so once she goes back in time, once she gets over kind of the shock of seeing her parents alive again and all of this, it goes into their relationship and him. She's very aloof towards him, and he naturally does not know why she's suddenly aloof towards him. So he has to win her back without really understanding that he's trying to win her back for a future together. There's not a whole lot of reason to dwell on Peggy Sue Got Married outside of that. It's Francis Ford Coppola, which is a pretty big deal. But the main reason to talk about Peggy Sue Got Married is to talk about Nicolas Cage's vocal choice. Do you remember his voice in that movie?
Yes, I do. One of many interesting vocal choices that that he has done throughout the years. Probably his first bizarre. How would you describe that? I guess it's not an accent. It's just
no. It's a tone. It's really nasally, and he has a way to describe it, but I don't even think that his way of describing it describes it. He was almost fired for it because nobody wanted him to do that voice. It drove Kathleen Turner crazy, especially since she's supposed to be falling in love with him again. And it drove his uncle, Francis Ford Coppola, crazy, who almost had to fire his own nephew until he was talked into here. Cage said, here, you got to give me a chance to do this. I will show you that this will work. And I mean, I guess it worked because the movie itself was nominated for an Oscar, but Cage wasn't. But he described it as he was inspired by Pokey from The Adventures of Gumby. So if you can figure out
that's the most goddamn Nicolas Cage thing I've ever heard.
And why would Pokey be his choice?
It's not even the same though. Like you said, it's like
he doesn't sound like Pokey
at all.
But
fucking Nick.
That's the source of the voice there. To leap again off of the Back to the Future trilogy, another really great time travel movie. And this is actually Peggy Sue Got Married is kind of a footnote in time travel, I would think. But the next film I think is a legitimate placeholder, is one of the best. And that's Time After Time, directed by Nicholas Meyer, about H.G. Wells himself creating an actual time machine and finding out in a very difficult way that his best friend is actually Jack the Ripper. And Jack the Ripper steals his time machine and takes it forward to modern day San Francisco, this was modern day 1979. And Wells chases him back there and falls in love with Mary Steenburgen, who is my connection back to the Future.
There you go. Who I have to say is one of the main reasons I have an eternal crush on Mary Steenburgen. No, it doesn't matter how old she gets. There's something so crushworthy about Mary Steenburgen. I totally get, why she's had such a long career. There's something very likable about her. Something very cute. But it's one of the weirdest fucking concepts for a movie. I need to watch it. Yeah, what a weird ass movie.
Yeah, it's an interesting movie because the acting is top notch. You've got Malcolm McDowell is playing H.G. Wells, and the great David Warner playing Jack the Ripper. And I want to take just a moment, make a side comment, since we're on Malcolm McDowell. I want to walk back a little bit some of the hate that I spewed about Clockwork Orange last time. I still mean every word I said about everything. But I want to, before we get too far, I just want to say I really appreciate Clockwork Orange. I get what it's about. I think that it's misinterpreted by a lot of its fans. There's no real reason to how many people every year dress as a known rapist for Halloween, thanks to Clockwork Orange, and have the posters. And when we grew up, there were poster and t-shirt shops all over the place, and you couldn't walk into those places. It was pretty much Reservoir Dogs and Clockwork Orange were guaranteed to be on every single rack. And I never really understood not how Clockwork Orange was considered a great movie, but how it's considered a fun movie at all. It's not fun. It's beautifully shot, but there's not a single stitch of film in Clockwork Orange that is fun to me. And it does sometimes drive me crazy that it's interpreted as something that is fun.
It's so infuriating. There's so many films of its kind, whether it's Fight Club. I mean, there's countless movies where the irony of the missed point is almost, it's embarrassing that most of its fan base completely not only just misses the point, but completely at 180 degrees misses the point of what the film is trying to say. And that's one perfect example. Like, the Droogies aren't heroes. Being being outside, it's
like, this isn't a story about someone that was robbed of their ambition by the prison system. The prison system's supposed to rob you of those ambitions. The prison system is supposed to make you never be like that again. And I'm not, I'm against a lot of methods that are used currently in prisons, and I would be against the one in Clockwork Orange as well. But we need to realize that Alex was not the victim of Clockwork Orange. He was a cog in the Clockwork Orange. Yep. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. I just wanted to clear that up because I felt I still maintain everything I said about the second half of Full Metal Jacket and the fact that Kubrick can't be that good because nobody can be as good as Kubrick. People say Kubrick is. Like, literally nobody on Earth that has ever lived can be as good at what they do as people say Stanley Kubrick is. And Stanley Kubrick would probably agree.
Yeah, but I agree 100% with Full Metal Jacket. Yeah, I do find it funny that we had a lot of quote unquote friends, you and I, growing up, hanging out at the old coffee shop, who almost made a fucking career out of misinterpreting movies.
I knew a guy that we kind of ran in that circle at one point, and I'm not going to call him out because I don't consider this person to be a bad person, but they needed to have it pointed out to them. He came in from a Halloween party one year dressed as Alex from Clockwork Orange, and he was asked what the girl situation was like at the bar, and he says, nobody was even talking to me. And I'm like, did you consider not dressing like a rapist for Halloween? If your ambition was to pick up chicks at the bar? The misinterpretations of that movie are legion.
Yes, absolutely.
But to write the track here, Time After Time, another great performance by Malcolm McDowell. Like I said, David Warner is fantastic in it. Mary Steenburgen is fantastic in it. Nicholas Meyer, who wrote and directed Wrath of Khan, is a great director. Some of the worst special effects I've ever seen in a movie ever. I think that's the reason why nobody really talks about this movie anymore. They are effects that I would have considered completely forgivable for a movie made in the late 60s or maybe even the early 70s. This came out in 79, just post, Star Trek, the motion picture, and Star Wars and Superman the movie. To have such horrible special effects is really unforgivable in a movie like this, of this time, of this budget. And so I think that's why it doesn't get talked about as much as it should be. But the performances and the story are really fascinating. It gives you a semi-reasonable sci-fi explanation for why Jack the Ripper was never caught, and draws some conclusions to the Zodiac Killer just by being in San Francisco and the Zodiac Killer never being caught. It kind of wraps up two of the greatest unsolved murder mysteries with a nice bow on top. Although they do mention the Zodiac Killer in Time After Time, so I guess he's not supposed to be that. But I think thematically you could tie that into what was going on within the culture at that time.
Yeah, I need to revisit. I love David Warner. Anyways, I'll watch anything with him, and I feel like Malcolm McDowell is that guy that he has definitely been in some terrible fucking movies over the last decade or two.
Yes,
but he's always good. Even in shitty movies, he's always at least enjoyable.
Yeah, I enjoy him. He married Mary Steenburgen after this movie, by the way. I had no idea until researching this that I knew that she's married to Ted Danson now, and very famously has been for decades. Yeah, but apparently
I had no idea they were married.
Yeah, they got married after this movie, and they do play love interests in this. So that was the thing. Are there any other big ones that kind of stand out as kind of lost classics to you in the time travel sphere? For me, there's a lot of newer ones that I feel like
I'm excited to talk about movies actually newer in the sense of even made in the last decade. But no, I mean, no, why don't you? I'm going to be very honest and just assume that you had a whole timeline of films to bring up, so I was just sort of waiting to go along with you. So we'll just continue that theme for this episode.
I didn't have a specific list of order to go in, and it's time travel. We can jump around.
That's right. Yeah.
If you want to talk about a newer one, well, I'll just ask, what is one of the newer ones that you wanted to talk about that you love? We can always return back to some of the older movies again.
Well, it's not even a movie I necessarily. The first one I wanted to talk about wasn't even a movie I even knew existed, and I'm a giant fan. So the first one I guess I'll bring up is I think it's 2015 or 2014's Predestination, starring Ethan Hawke, based off of a Robert Heinlein short story called All You Zombies, which I still think is a weird title. But it's one of the most fucking head-scratching concepts. It actually caused a giant argument between my wife and I about whether it's even possible.
I was trying to explain the plot of this to my wife earlier today. So I just saw this one for the first time very recently as well.
It literally, even after I saw the movie, I would then, an argument was like, wait, am I wrong? But it's also, so I'll give a very quick synopsis but at the same time, I feel like you cannot talk about this movie without spoiling the ending.
This is almost every second of this is spoiler alert.
Yeah, so I mean,
let's say what you will, though. I mean, warning to everybody, but I think everyone who listens to us knows that we
spoilers.
We follow spoiler alert protocol at least 70% of the time.
That's right. But I mean, one thing about this movie is every now and then, and it's inevitable with time travel stories, where you kind of almost know where they're going. You realize what the plot point, what the overall theme of the film is. And because time travel is involved, a lot of times with these films, you can sort of go, well, oh, I bet they're going to do this. And in fact, I'll talk about that probably in another film as well. But halfway through this movie, I was like, holy shit, I'm like, I wonder if that's what they're going for. But then at the same time, consciously, I realized like, well, there's no way because that's too fucking crazy. Nope, that's where it goes. Basically, the whole point Robert Heinlein wrote the story was about creating humanity, somebody who can't exist out like in it's even trying to explain this movie, I'm going to have an aneurysm. So basically Ethan Hawke plays this like time agent. It's very ambiguous, the overall, like even like, the mechanics of it. They don't like even the time machine. They don't spend time even really explaining it. It's like a cello case, or some sort of musical case.
Yeah.
Not cello case, that'd be huge, but like a,
no, it's like a violin or a trumpet case or something.
Trumpet, like it's got maybe like an oboe or something. I don't know, but
the oboe of time. Now exactly. I've got my script.
Exactly. But so he's trying to like stop this like the Fizzle bomber, who's a bomber who basically he's going to blow up this giant section in New York and kill 11,000 people, but he keeps changing the date, so they're having a hard time catching him. But he's also time travel is really hard on the human body, both mentally and physically. So the amount of jumps that you do can really fuck you up. So he's got to find his own replacement. And he basically goes to this bar and he starts talking to, dude, it's even hard to like, yeah. So it's basically, what you think is first is like either a trans man, somebody like a female who is a born female, but is living as a man or presenting as a man. But then you find out her story, and her story is far more complicated and complex. I'll just go ahead and summarize it and say you find out that there is we will say her the unwed mother, the unmarried mother, who's the name of this female presenting as a male. There's the time agent played by Ethan Hawke, the unmarried mother who the actress's name is blank on me, but
her last name's Bloom, I think. This was supposed to be a star-making turn for her. And
Ruth Bloom, or
she earned it. She should be doing more stuff. She was actually really good in this, but I can't think of anything.
Yeah, she was great, really great. In fact, her role is very complicated. But basically, spoiler alert: every single person in this movie is the same person. Yeah. So down to the female. There's a baby that's involved. There's the female version and the male version, the unmarried mother. Ethan Hawke and the Fizzle bomber are all the same person. And in fact, the unmarried mother gave birth to herself and got herself pregnant. She literally was born a baby. I can't even explain it. It's so fucking bizarre. But I feel like
but that was the whole idea, was that in order to be like one of these secret agent time travelers, they're not supposed to have any connection to the real world.
Correct.
And at first they're trying to recruit people that are like they have to be a virgin because they can't have any kind of possible links to other people or the potential to have children. All these sort of things that they set up as vague ideas of how people are not supposed to be connected. And then as the movie goes on, you start to realize the way this guy is not connected to the real world is because this person doesn't exist in the real world.
He is outside of any time frame, any timeline. I guess that's the whole point, is that
like he doesn't actually exist, yet he exists.
Yes, exactly. And that's what, like, his entire existence is predetermined, because it was basically he's forced to exist because of this company made him. And even then I don't even understand the mechanics, even though. So reviewing it as a film, I thought the time travel concept in it, like, this movie is just pure time. I mean, that's literally the whole point, is about time and time travel and time manipulating and living living amongst different time frames. And but I mean, having said what I just said, that could turn a lot of people off, and rightfully I can understand. Like, it's kind of an insane concept, and even I was like, wait, so if I fucked myself, if I was born, I don't even know if hermaphrodite is even the correct term anymore, but if I was born intersex, whatever, having multiple sexual organs and fucked myself, I'm like, I can imagine the genetics there would be as fucked up as, I mean, like, that even create a child anyways. But
we're starting to get to a point where, like, The Hills Have Eyes is actually a more advanced family than this.
Exactly. Like, yeah, he's the best case scenario. But the thing is, the movie's actually, it's first off, anything Ethan Hawke is in, I will see, because I really feel like he's one of the few actors that really is smart about choosing the right scripts and the right projects. And I think he has a really great taste in choosing films, and they're not always going to be the same type of film, but he's going to make, he signed the projects that are at least going to be interesting. But the performances are great. The cinematography is very subtle and subdued, and like, obviously it was a small budget film, but they used what budget they had really smartly. I like, as a film itself, I actually kind of liked it, even though at the end I was like, what? And like, even just
I couldn't look away. I was fascinated.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the story structure itself even works. People are going to just have to see it for themselves. It's maybe problematic because of the trans element of it for some people, but it's not treated as problematic in the script. It's not, I don't feel like it's offensive. It's all just part of the mind fuck. But
in fact, it's actually not, very.
Yeah, it's tastefully done within the realms of science fiction. And as long as you're not thinking that it's supposed to make any kind of statement whatsoever, positive or negative, on actual trans existence, especially with the title like Predestination, I think that's where the most problematic part of the movie might be the title, based on the trans element. They probably should have called it Predestination.
I will say my biggest plot point in the film, though, my biggest problem where I'm like, is the idea of somebody romantically falling in love with themselves. Like, I feel like that's psychologically too big of a gap to
That was a real big leap. Yeah, it was. They play it up as at the very beginning of the movie, when the trans man is. They never, I think the Unwed Mother, I think, is the name of the actual character.
Unmarried Mother,
and Ethan Hawke is playing, the name of the character is the barkeep. So they don't actually really have names. They're assigned names at different points, but those are never actually their names. So the Unmarried Mother is telling his story about being born a girl, and in recounting in voiceover narration is saying, like, I wasn't very pretty. I wasn't very special. And here I am, like, now looking at the flashback and thinking, this girl is, like, beautiful. Like, why are they, if they were going to play it this way, then why would they pick a beautiful actress to play that? Because they lost me here. And I was expecting to be lost from that point on. But later on, when the Unwed Mother runs into her former female self, one of the first things that he says is, you're beautiful. Like, he didn't realize that she was beautiful growing up. Like, her memory of her, the pronouns on this, I swear to God, we're
yeah. Well, in this case, it's as you can't, because even the character doesn't identify as one. That's the thing, is like, she identifies as neither in the film. So
but the memory of being a child was of being very like awkward and not attractive because nobody ever said that she was attractive. And so you start to see how maybe he's falling in love with her because nobody else loved her. She was an orphan in theory.
Yeah.
So
and that's all that she even says the whole.
I think that's the stretch you're supposed to make, is that it's not that they really fall in love. It's just that he enjoys giving love to the unloved version of himself.
So that's because to the past her, she does feel like it's love, because here's this person who wants to take care of her and is giving her unconditional, tender, legitimate love and physical love, which she's never had. And then to future self, it's like almost like she wants to take care of. That's even the conversation that she has with herself, that they have with themselves, of like, you act like love doesn't matter to you, but it's literally all you think about and stuff. And like, there's a they want to take care of themselves. Yeah. But it's still, again, having said that, I don't know if I could go back in time, and I don't know. It's just, there's a weird,
the crux of the story is that they have to have a baby together. And that's where it starts to get like, okay, did you really need to love yourself that much?
Exactly. And it's just like, it's a little bit of a leap in logic, but either way, it's a very interesting film, very unique film. And I thought one of the more original uses of time travel. So,
and one of the best cinematic uses of the song "I'm My Own Grandpa."
That's right. Which at that point, I will say that I literally rolled my eyes, but
apparently that was in the Heinlein novel.
I'm sure
Heinlein made a reference to that song, because how can you not when you're being that cheeky?
That's right.
Well, to keep it with something a little bit more contemporary, there's one that I discovered, and Predestination was one that I discovered on this research kick as well, and I'm glad I did. But there's a Netflix movie that came out last year that, in all honesty, I probably would have skipped entirely just because I have so much other stuff to watch, and watched because of this. And it's a movie called See You Yesterday, an original Netflix film from 2019. I said last year. It's actually the year before last. And it's produced by Spike Lee and is about kids inventing a time travel machine, like high school age kids, and being very directly affected by police brutality and the Black Lives Matter movement crashing into their own lives as an example of police brutality. And this girl's need to travel back to time, repeatedly trying to save her brother from being shot by the police when he's completely innocent. The police are looking for somebody else. And I applaud it for being as fun as it is while tackling such an incredibly serious topic. And this wasn't, yes, the Black Lives Matter movement fully exploded in 2020, but it wasn't like it was a light issue in 2019 either. This was a really bold choice for them. And it's really enjoyable and fun at the same time, as much so as any of the, Back to the Future movies or Time After Time, like the fun sci-fi sort of, hey, let's do this elements, that they're all still there. They all exist, and you have fun with these characters, but you start to see that there's consequences. And it's like every time she goes back to try to save her brother, she loses somebody else. They leave it rather open-ended as to whether she's going to continue to try to fix these problems, because at a certain point she's trying to bring back multiple people who are getting killed due to her actions. And a lot of these things that are happening are based on her actions. Like certain things happen because she's in a place that she shouldn't have been in at that time. And I thought it was kind of cool too, that it was realistic enough that, yeah, they're inventing this time machine, these two kids in their garage, but it's not like a fully functioning time machine where they can pick the year. Like they can go back a day. And then as it becomes more intense, they figure out how to go back almost a week, but they're not able to like go back to before they were born or any of that. They're consistently going back a couple of days. So, which saves a lot on story and saves a lot on budget, frankly, too, because it's not like you had to have, makeup jobs so the grandma looked different.
That's right. Exactly.
But it's also notable for having the cameo of all cameos in time travel movies. This is the movie that finally got a cameo out of Michael J. Fox. He plays their teacher at the beginning of the movie, and he even says the line "Great Scott." So, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But I showed it to my wife and stepdaughter because I thought they would enjoy it, especially since it's the main character she's a female protagonist, a black female protagonist that's inventing time travel. And I thought that was a good sort of role model for my stepdaughter. Yeah. But we were commenting on like, Michael J. Fox has probably been asked to cameo on at least every other time travel movie that's come out since 1985.
Right.
This is the one where he said yes. So if that lets you know anything about the quality of this script and the fact that Spike Lee put his name on it, this is a really good script. This is a really well acted movie. So if anybody out there has not seen See You Yesterday on Netflix, I highly suggest you go there now. And aside from a pretty strong abundance of 4-letter words, it's a good movie to watch with your family.
Hey man, we grew up with like the Goonies and
these
family films used to actually have a few.
This was more than a few. These kids actually talked like I talked in high school, which is one of the things I appreciate about it.
Yeah, no, and that's how kids really talk. Kids
have dirtier mouths than their parents realize, and parents all seem to forget over the course of when they learn the words. These kids talk like real teenagers, and so there's a couple of fucks and shits within the first 5 minutes even. So if that's the type of thing that offends you, the first thing you should probably do is unsubscribe, and then the next thing you should do
that's right. How are you listening to this podcast?
Right. But I want to make sure that got a shout out. Did you ever see that one?
No, in fact, you were telling me about it the other day, and I was like, damn, like I honestly had never even heard of it. It completely escaped me. So, but again, definitely sounds like a movie I want to see. I don't know if you saw a Vampire in the Bronx, or was that what it was called?
Vampire with Netflix. Eddie Murphy?
No, not a Vampire in Brooklyn. Vampires in the like Vampires in the Bronx, or there was a vampire movie that came out last year. Basically, like takes place in the Bronx. So like it's a bunch of it's a cast of young kids of color, young black kids and Afro-Cuban kids and stuff. And there's like these, basically there's literally references to Blade, and it almost feels almost like a remake of like Lost Boys or Fright Night. It has the heart of an 80s vampire movie, but just told through a modern lens and through kids of color and people of color, and set in modern day, the Bronx, obviously. And basically there's because there's all these white vampires moving in, and like they're causing the property values to raise, but there's a whole there's a very slick intelligence to the movie, while still being a very much almost like an Amblin, like a fun family, even though kids swear, and it's a vampire movie, but it's definitely more lighthearted and definitely more, there's a fun element to it. But yeah, it was really heartwarming. It's probably in my top 10 films of last year.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, so it's and again, very similar, telling an old story but in a new way with a new audience in mind, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I love when that happens. I mean, that's the type of thing that there's a lot of older film fans that get upset when they see similar themes from the movies they grew up in repeat in modern movies. Like, well, it's just a rip off of this. I'm like, well, that was just a rip off of something else, and it's another like. How is anybody supposed to learn about what came in the past if you're not giving them something they can digest in the present?
That's we could have a whole podcast about how these 40-year-old dorks who oh, this ruined my childhood, and all this get out of here, dude, grow up. And I was having the conversation recently about how I'm a huge fan of Astor, and I loved Hereditary, and I love Midsommar, and I think Midsommar is brilliant. I think start to finish, it's a complete film, a very well thought film. There's some haunting shit to Midsommar, but all these people are oh, it's just a ripoff of of The Wicker Man. I'm like, every movie is a ripoff of. Are you telling me that you hate John Carpenter's Halloween because it's a ripoff of fucking Peeping Tom? No, right. Movies revisit the same themes. Fucking Christ!
It's what they're supposed to do. It's our job to point people in the right direction of, oh, if you liked this, then you'll love that.
Exactly.
That's what podcasts are supposed to do. That's why we start this with Back to the Future. If we were really doing a podcast about the legitimate subgenre of time travel, then we would probably just say everyone knows about Back to the Future, so let's not say anything.
Very true.
To keep up with kind of the modern run here, because I know we both have some stuff from the past we want to get to, but before we close out the present, I don't know how much you would want to say about it or if you've even seen it, but there's probably a lot of people who would be jumping up and down and saying, you haven't spoken about Looper yet. You haven't said Looper.
Yeah, let's talk about Looper real quick. Rian Johnson, obviously, at this day and age, he's a promising filmmaker who a lot of people shit on now because he had the audacity to
make a
ruin
good
Star
movie
Wars for people. Yeah, but
I'm sorry, I liked Last Jedi better than Rise of Skywalker, but the inherent problems of that series are not at the feet of any of those filmmakers. I'm fine with them reviving Star Wars. They probably shouldn't have done that trilogy, though.
No, I agree. We could have a whole episode of Star Wars. But so Looper,
the very talented Rian Johnson directed Looper.
Yeah, I liked it. I think outside of the distracting makeup effects to make Joseph Gordon-Levitt look like Bruce Willis,
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'll keep going up, but I'll bring back to that.
I love Joseph Gordon-Levitt ever since I saw Mysterious Skin, however 20 years ago. God, it's been that long. He's that old. Yeah. The kid, the long-haired kid from 30 Rock from the Sun blew me away in Mysterious Skin. So I've been a fan since. Emily Blunt is great, and it's funny because Emily Blunt was in 2 back-to-back time travel movies I hadn't seen. She's good in it. Bruce Willis is good for the roles he's in. It's a clever movie. There's a lot of concepts that are clever. I will say I saw the ending coming minute 2 in it. I was like, I know how this is ending, which is a little disappointing, but understandable. I get it.
I don't think he was trying to be deep. That's the thing. I think that's a misconception that people have about a lot of Rian Johnson stuff. He's not ever really trying to be deep. He's trying to be popcorn. And this was a good popcorn movie. The fact that you think about it a little bit on a deeper level really has to do with the conceit of time travel to begin with, and time travel in terms of meeting yourself. And
I think one thing I think he does well is I do think he makes interesting characters, very much fallible, 3-dimensional, flawed humans, because no character in this movie is perfect. I mean, even Emily Blunt's character has issues she's dealing with, even trying to, she's even willing to risk, her, the young child possibly being one of the most, despicable potential crime lords ever. But again, it's understandable. She's a nerd. Anyways, it's not going to go into all that, but it's a good movie. It was a movie I saw because when it came out, a lot of people loved it. A lot of my friends really, really huge fans. I think he's gotten stronger as a filmmaker. I think Knives Out, having seen a lot of his films kind of relatively recently, I think he's gotten stronger. But I think Looper is a great. I don't know if it was his first movie, but
no, that would have been Brick, I think.
Oh, that's right. He did Brick, which is also very interesting. And while not a perfect film, it is flawed. I think there's a lot of originality there, and even the conceit is pretty interesting. But either way, I thought Looper was cool. I thought it was very much a very much a dystopian. There's a lot of things they did that were really smart, like the fact that they have these hover cycles, but they're shit and they constantly break down. They're expensive, but they don't really work. All that stuff, I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting and stuff. There's a lot of those calling the shotguns blunderbusses and all these kind of idiosyncrasies that I thought were a little heavy-handed or a little trying to be, like I say, Clockwork Orange or something that, having it. I don't know. It's like this. I don't know. There's some things which I'm I don't know how I feel about that. Is that cool or is that a little eye-rolly? But overall, I thought it was a good movie. I thought, what they did with this, they did, it's an interesting concept, being basically using time travel. It's illegal. So the only way they can use it is sending people in the past to get rid of them. Cool. I mean, that's cool. That's interesting. The whole telekinetic thing, I was like, that literally is only a conceit in there for the final,
Yeah, it was a plot device. They only put, that I did have a little bit of I didn't dislike it, but I did feel like it was a little sloppy. What I did dislike was exactly what you called out at the beginning, was that they did do some light prosthetic work on Joseph Gordon-Levitt's face so that he could look like a young Bruce Willis throughout the movie. And I found that so distracting because, for one thing, I didn't know it was a prosthetic at first. And so I spent half of the movie looking at Joseph Gordon-Levitt trying to figure out if that was a prosthetic or if he had found a way to manipulate his mouth to kind of droop in the exact way that Bruce Willis's does. And if it had just been Joseph Gordon-Levitt and you gave me the story conceit that Bruce Willis is the same person in the future, I would have bought it because, you know what, I'm watching a movie and I understand that most parts aren't played by twins. And
that's right.
And it wouldn't have bothered me in the slightest that they don't necessarily look alike with the 40-year age gap between them or whatever it might be between those two. The fact that they did do a prosthetic on his lower jaw to make him look more like Bruce Willis completely threw me off and made me enjoy the scenes between the two of them less, or any of the scenes with him less.
Well, again, it's very distracting because
it's very distracting.
You're literally spending the movie like going like looking at the prosthetic, and yeah, it was a weird choice. I get it. I get.
Overall, the performances were good enough to beat that.
That's what I'm saying. Even a lot of the characters that play like Paul Dano is always great in everything he plays. There's a specific character type he plays really well. But the guy that plays the other looper who's sort of on his trail, his buddy who is trying to get every character in it is at least enjoyable. So yeah, like I said, it's if I were to outright grade, I'd say C plus B minus. But that's not bad. I feel like
there's nothing wrong with a movie being okay. There's literally I can love a movie that's okay. I would probably edge closer to the B minus, than the C. But I agree with you. Now,
I think just like I said, for me, I was like, this one I don't need. There's no reason to spoil the film, so I won't. But I was like 2 minutes into it. I'm like, it was just I saw the ending coming a mile away, and sometimes it's when you're that obvious with something, I'm always like, come on, but it's fine.
But at that point, you sit back and take the ride. Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, another movie that has a similar sort of time travel conceit to it that people I think are going to expect us to talk about, but I think that it's been talked about enough that we don't have to go too in depth, but we would probably be a little remiss to not mention at least the first Terminator.
My favorite time travel movie of all time.
Is it really?
The very first Terminator.
Is it really? Okay.
It's one of my favorite movies ever made.
Oh, I absolutely love it, but I didn't expect it to be your favorite.
Terminator is one of the movies, and let me go on record as saying, and I might have brought up, I talk about movies on a lot of different formats. So, spoiler, or I know if we have fans, they might get a lot of heat for this, but not a fan of any Terminator film past the first one. And yes, I'm including Terminator 2. Terminator 2 is one of the most poorly aged, most self-dated films of all time. It is like fucking Crystal Pepsi. It has not aged well. It is a fucking Looney Tunes cartoon version of the original film. Again, I've said to boil it down to my feelings. The first Terminator is a fucking stalk and kill horror science fiction movie that is more horror than it's science fiction. It uses gigantic science fiction tropes in it and the whole conceit, cyborgs and time travel, science fiction. But the ultimate, what the film is, it is the most stalk and kill, unkillable thing trying to get you. You're running from the boogeyman. I think it's literally a perfect film from start to finish. The whole concept of only flesh can time travel and all those things, really interesting. They did things with it that, obviously have no leg to stand on scientifically, but it's interesting and made their own film. But, the ultimate, that again, one of the biggest problems with time travel is once you start to, you start thinking about it, it keeps, time just keeps you, once you go down that rabbit hole of wait, if time travel is real, then why don't they just do this? And Terminator is one of the worst case scenarios because, instead of going back into 1984 to kill a Sarah Connor when she's, an old lady, when they fucking travel back in time and kill her when she's a baby, or, if it happens, they're going to know about it in the future. So it's just a whole, this makes no sense, but who gives a fuck? It's a fun ass movie. Right. Kyle Reese is one of the coolest fucking 80s, protagonists, and Linda, I almost called her Linda Carter. Jesus Christ.
Wrong 84.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, my favorite thing about Terminator 2 is the transformation of Sarah Connor. She's already a badass in the first one. Yes, she's just a normal waitress lady that gets trapped in this, but she's a bad bitch from the day one. She is a formidable person. Part 2 just turns her into fucking Captain America, which again is the coolest part of Terminator 2. Anything that involves Edward Furlong can go fuck itself. I hate Terminator 2, and the rest of the franchise. Honestly, it shouldn't have. They keep trying and they have not done it successfully. And I say some people say, "Oh, Salvation is underrated," or "Rise of the Machines is underrated." No, they're all mediocre at best. At best, where the first one's literally, I feel like, a perfect film.
I agree. So I do have a soft spot for part 2. I think I've said this in the podcast before, where it's an entirely nostalgia based thing. I was 12 when Terminator 2 came out. It was not the first, but one of the first R-rated movies I went to go see in the theater. It was certainly the first R-rated movie I made a big deal about going to see in the theater. My dad took me and a couple of my Boy Scout buddies, and it is distinctly one of the first memories I have of leaving the theater and having that super geek moment with your friends of like driving home and talking about the movie nonstop.
Yeah.
So very formative in that sense. Looking back on it with 2020 eyes, I can see all the problems, and it has not aged particularly well, but I still enjoy watching the movie because it makes me think of my dad, and it makes me think of my Boy Scout buddies that I haven't seen in 30 years. But the original is a certifiable classic. Yes, it has plot holes. It's problematic in various ways, but it's an incredibly tight independent thriller.
Fuck yes, dude.
And a completely brand new conceit. I mean, so much has come since the Terminator that owes its entire existence to the Terminator. I want to point out a little fun fact that I pieced this together in my own head the other day, thinking about the Terminator for this. Do you know Bill Paxton is the only actor who has been killed by a Terminator, a Predator, and an alien?
Yep. Yes, I do.
Why had we've never talked about this.
That's one of the internet's new favorite factoids that I see.
Is it really?
Every now and then. Yeah. I will say, even the like people that appear it, Bill Paxton, fucking Brian Thompson, Lance Henriksen, even people that have the smallest role in that movie are geniuses. So
I know.
But yeah, to me, it's
Paul Winfield.
That's right. Exactly. That's the thing. For me, it's one of those. Well, I could talk about the Terminator all day, but one thing is like it's one of the few films that really affected me. Like I grew up watching. Me and my brother would literally, as soon as my parents every Friday, you guys go rent a movie, boom, right to the fucking horror movies. I watched horror movies nonstop as a kid. Nothing really scared me, but the Terminator scared me because there are sequences in that when he goes to as a kid, you're like, well, if you run away, just go to the police. Also, in every film, like, well, the police will protect you. Not in this movie. Police get murdered, like cut down like so much wheat and chaff. Like they
in seconds, in a matter of seconds, an entire police precinct is taken out.
Yeah, and that's so cool. Like he's such a scary character, but he's also so fucking bitch, and like and it's cemented so much. Yes, there's a few things about it that are bad. Some of the special effects, while some of the effects were great, obviously the endoskeleton at the end is great, and some of the practical effects are a little goofy. And the Terminator's hair, he got a haircut at some point halfway through that movie that they never explained.
His eyebrows too.
His eyebrows. But yeah, Terminator's one of those ones. It's always one of the first that obviously come to mind when you say time travel, because that's the whole point.
It's the whole conceit. Yeah, and it's a different kind of approach to time travel.
Absolutely.
Did you ever hear about? I've actually seen a lot of this popping up online lately, but I don't know if that's because I researched the Terminator that Google is now sending me this article over and over again. But do you know who was the studio suggestion to play the Terminator?
I have heard this. It wasn't Richard Gere. It's like somebody you wouldn't expect.
It was O.J. Simpson.
Who was? That's right. O.J. Simpson.
O.J. Simpson to play the Terminator. And he was actually rejected by James Cameron because James Cameron said, no, everyone knows O.J. Simpson is a nice guy.
Nice guy. You could never.
But how different would life have been if O.J. Simpson had been the Terminator?
And see, that's what's so great, though. And I think that's what, like, Schwarzenegger had done films before Terminator, but he was still relatively unknown enough that, like, the blankness of the Terminator itself, of the T-800, you saw the aesthetic, not just his physique, but his Schwarzenegger's, like, deep-set eyes, his jowls. Like, there's something very unsettling about his appearance anyways. And then the fact that, like, that blank performance, the fact that you didn't really know Schwarzenegger as, like, a huge celebrity, like, by that point, 84, he's one of the most famous athletes of all time. So that having an almost like an unknown or a blank slate actor like Schwarzenegger, who's like a physical specimen, so he adds that as well. The fact that there's like that blankness, that like there's no personality, no nothing, I think really worked perfectly for that. And I think like
and Schwarzenegger was perfectly cast too, because he actually took the part pretty seriously. Like he studied how to shoot guns for like a month prior. Like, I mean, he actually did his research, whereas I think most other actors would have just said, yeah, I'm playing a robot.
I'm playing a cyborg. A killer robot. Yeah.
They wouldn't even, I don't think the world really knew what a cyborg was prior to, I mean, there was such a thing.
Yeah.
I'd be interested if Terminator was the first use of the word in a film, but I think cyborgs were something that was talked about in legitimate science or
yeah, exactly. And like the Isaac Asimov stuff. And
yeah.
but yeah, interesting. I now know that as soon as this podcast is over, I feel like I'm going to go just put on my Blu-ray of Terminator just because I want to see it again.
Good idea. There's one from about that same period of time, maybe a couple of years prior, that is really one of the lost classics of the 80s. I think it's time to rediscover this. I don't know if you've ever seen Time Rider.
We've talked about this. I know
title,
much.
I think the full title is Time Rider: The Adventure of Lyle Swan. Not adventures plural, the adventure of Lyle Swan. I don't know why they
What is with Fred Ward and those kind of titles?
I don't know. He was consistently making movies that were supposed to be series that never But so you never saw Time Rider?
No, I know. It's one of those films that like pops up when you lists of weird movies that you should see. And it's one of those movies that, again, I didn't even know there was even like, seeing if it was streaming or anything like that. So it hasn't been readily available, but it's one that it's been on my list to see for a long time.
It's not easy to get. Yeah. I found it on Amazon where you can rent it for like $3.99 or you can buy it for $5.99. So I bought it. Part of the whole reason to get it was actually because there has never been a uncut version of this available on DVD or Blu-ray. There's like a $30 Blu-ray, but it's a cut version of the movie, and nobody seems to know when, where, or why the cuts were made. And they aren't significant, and nothing in the plot is going to be hurt by it, but you're going to lose a little bit of gore and some of the stuff that makes sense. But Time Rider is about Fred Ward is Lyle Swan, who is, according to the film, like the greatest dirt biker of all time. The whole opening sequence is him doing these incredible things. He's wearing this helmet as he's doing it. And there's people in the desert all there for a race, and they're watching this guy go through and do all this stuff. And everybody that sees him do something crazy, they're like, that must be Lyle Swan. Like the setup for how important he is to the dirt bike racing community is actually pretty funny. But he ends up out in the desert on the day that some weird undercover science organization is conducting their first their first time experiment. They're going to send a monkey back in time. And, of course, he's just riding around his dirt bike, having a good time and being a badass as he does. And he ends up like on their testing site, and he gets sent back to the Old West somehow in the process of all of this. And I don't think they ever tell you whether the monkey made it back. No, the monkey does make it back with them, but the monkey is in a proper receptacle to where they can bring the monkey back, but they can't bring Lyle back. So he's stuck in the Old West, and he has no idea he's in the Old West. So he just thinks everybody's crazy. And of course, everybody in the Old West is mystified by his motorcycle and his super helmet, because of course he can't just have a regular helmet. He has to have a helmet that tells you how many meters away something is, and right. He's some sort of robot helmet. And so he's trying to get back, but he has no idea that he's even gone. Like, he doesn't know what the hell's going on. It's funny because like the scientists that are trying to get him back in modern day, they're not able to communicate with him, and you just kind of get this idea that they're working on something, ambiguously something, to get him back. And they're hardly even focused on, where most of the story takes place in the West and him fighting a band of outlaws led by Peter Coyote, Richard Mazur, and Tracy Walters, who were trying to steal his motorcycle because they would have won the Civil War if the Confederacy had one of those machines. And they want to make money off of this machine. And it's really as complicated as it sounds. Like, it's really dumb. There's a lot of jokes at everybody's expense. A lot of Fred Ward making jokes about the present day 1982 or whatever that none of the Western people understand. And there's a whole sequence that he ends up kind of raped by a woman in the Old West. she holds him at gunpoint. And it was really kind of uncomfortable for a moment. He's like, wait a minute, you're a girl. You can't. Oh, okay. And goes for it. And as the movie progresses, you start to realize there's kind of a predestination thing going on here, where he was just with his grandmother. So yeah, he's basically making himself one generation removed. So he was always meant to go back to the Old West. But one of the things that reminded me of, and this is a good way to springboard off until the next thing. It's written by Michael Nesmith, which I thought was kind of cool, of the Monkees, but it reminded me certain elements of Army of Darkness, which a lot of people don't think of as a time travel movie. Maybe because it's a sequel, I don't know, about a non-time travel storyline. But the same sort of idea of the loudmouth braggart being sent through time with a machine from the future, in this case, a dirt bike versus a chainsaw, a lot of the same sort of tropes. And I actually think they make a really good companion piece for one another. And I actually think Time Rider is almost as self-aware as Army of Darkness was. I mean, there's no doubt when you're watching Army of Darkness, it's completely self-aware. It knows exactly what it is. Time Rider, I think some of the things that are happening in there are kind of in that same sort of self-aware vein where you're kind of laughing at how silly this is rather than someone else might have tried to make it as more badass or something like that. But I think Michael Nesmith did a pretty good job of making it pretty acknowledge how ridiculous the concept is. I don't know if you want to talk about Army of Darkness. We're getting a little late here, and that is one of the greatest movies ever made. But
yeah, let's talk about it real quick. We'll burn through a few real quick. I mean, at this point, I think everybody who listens to this podcast has seen Army of Darkness. We don't need to explain it. But yeah. At the end of Evil Dead 2, the original ending was going to involve time travel, but it was more the world has ended, post-apocalyptic. He wakes up and it's basically Rip Van Winkle. He's, slept and the world's gone to shit. Which I think it was smarter to go the medieval route. I think it was a cooler idea to send him back in time. It's perfect. Again, it's it's where Evil Dead 1 and 2 were horror films. Army of Darkness is almost like a Ray Harryhausen adventure film.
Yeah.
That just happens to, but every bit of dialogue is perfect. The special effects, all the Deadite designs, the plot. I mean, it's one of the most. I still remember being in 7th grade and somebody dropped a big ass box off of the class I was in, and the teacher just handed out all of these kids. Back in the day, there was these things called books, and sometimes you put on those books book covers, which were like a laminated piece of paper that you felt and basically protect the book. And this was literally an Army of Darkness book cover. And I remember seeing the poster, which is it was basically a mini poster that you wrapped around it, and being like, "What the fuck? How have I not heard of this?" So I'll still never forget that. Realizing that there was going to be a sequel to Evil Dead, and that it was called Army of Darkness with one of the coolest poster designs of all time. But yeah, what do you say? It's perfect. Everything about it's perfect. It's some people complain that it's not a direct horror sequel, that it's not as horror as Evil Dead 2, but to me, it was the coolest way to go. You can't outdo what Evil Dead 2 did in its own way. So just make it crazier, bigger, and it's perfect. It's literally perfect.
100% agree. Bruce Campbell is still one of my favorite actors, and I loved Evil Dead 2 and Evil Dead 1 prior to going to see Army of Darkness as well. I was definitely a fan of the series and was aware that it was a series. I think there was a lot of people who went to go see it having no idea it was the third movie in a series. But Army of Darkness is what made Bruce Campbell like my favorite actor of my teenage years. Like that was the one where like, oh God, this guy is amazing. How come this guy's not winning every award? I mean, I know that I know that maybe he's not as deep as a De Niro or something, but
I disagree. But yes, I agree. Devin, I feel like once again, we're gonna have to do what we said we weren't gonna do. I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 because there's tons of movies we haven't even gotten to that I really feel like we need to spend some time on. So
I was just looking at my list and trying to figure out what I could clip, and I'm actually glad to hear you suggest the part 2 because there's a bunch of stuff I don't want to clip.
Yeah, and that's the thing is exactly. So I will call it listeners. So look out for part 2 of time travel films. We promise someday we'll record a single episode, a single digestible episode. Unless you guys let us know, and again, if you don't mind the part 2s, we'll keep making them. I mean, no skin off my back.
Yeah. But, if we keep doing them, I think I'd rather do more a month though, or plan to have a 2-fer and then do a 1-fer to to follow it up. But we'll talk about those details later.
Well, yeah, not listeners, we do have some things that we're planning, some possible surprises for possibly the near future or the inevitable future or so, but we will keep mom on those. But we're looking to maybe offer more of us because I know people can't get enough of us. That's what everybody's clamoring for.
It's 2021, and this is a second season of Den of Sin. So yeah, we are talking about bringing some changes, not to the format that you already know and love, but some additions to the format that you already know and love.
Exactly.
And we're talking about possibly putting together a Patreon and having some tiers and getting you guys some bonus stuff for those of you that really care about it, while still keeping this part of the show the same. Yeah, I think you're smart to call it, James. I think that time travel is a bigger topic than we thought. We didn't even get to the is it a time travel movie? So
that's right. Which there's a lot of those films that I wanted to talk about. So absolutely. I think some of those are some of the more interesting films to even to discuss.
And we didn't even talk about the romantic elements of time travel, which I know are people that know us. They just want to hear us talk more about our favorite romantic films.
That's right.
And
look, man, if you don't have a romantic soul, I don't feel like you can truly enjoy films. That's
my favorite romance movie of all time is a time travel story. So I will let people try to figure out what I know you know what it is. But we haven't even gotten to JCVD. We've got some Van Damme coming up.
We always have some Van Damme coming up. That's a guarantee of Den of Sin. There's got to be some Van Damme. Some Van Damage.
We'll get to it next time. Until then, things are still crazy. Even though it's a new year, we've still got the same precautions. So make sure that you're staying safe out there. Make sure that you're being good to one another. And let's make it through at least to the next episode. We'll take it one episode at a time and see if civilization can survive without us creating a time machine.
That's right.
So until then, like us on Twitter and Facebook. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. We've got a whole lot of new surprises. I've got playlists for every one of our topics. I've gone ahead and backdated this thing. So I've got a special playlist on Burt Reynolds and a playlist on werewolf movies and a playlist dedicated to Jamie Lee Curtis and canon films. So if you want to go back and watch any of some of the classic trailers or documentaries or interviews with those stars, in some cases, thanks to the magic of YouTube, I've even been able to put up the entire movies that we've been discussing. So please do go and check out our spruced up YouTube. I think you'll be rewarded, and I think there's a lot of fun content on there to explore these topics further, so that you can make your own part 2 and part 3 and part 4 of these discussions.
Well, unfortunately, Devin, we don't have a time machine, so we can't travel in time and present episode 2 to the people immediately, but I look forward to recording part 2. And listeners, thank you guys for listening as always. And until next time, watch some good movies.
All right. Good advice, and Happy New Year, everybody. Bye.
Bye.